Okay, we walked about, I don't know how far. Behind the cabin there's a trail going up here, and looks like there's a single grave up here on top of this hill. Sorry about the sun, but it's in the morning and I'm coming the wrong way. But here's her grave right here. Behind the cabin there's a trail going up here, and looks like there's a single grave up here on top of this hill. Sorry about the sun, but it's in the morning and I'm coming the wrong way. But here's her grave right here. Man, it's nice. She's all up here by herself. Evidently I don't see any other headstones, footstones, anything. But in this something, seashells, arrowheads, jewelry. Somebody's come up here and rubbed this thing. You can still see Belle Starr, a glass jar and some Copenhagen. I didn't know she chewed, but maybe she did. She was quite a woman, so she might have chewed tobacco or dipped snuff, one of the two. And then somebody came back at a later date, I guess, and put this in. I really don't know. But anyway, Belle Starr, Eufaula, near Eufaula, east of Eufaula, Oklahoma. It's real near the dam on Lake Eufaula, within a mile of the dam. So if you can find that, you can find this.
Those are called greenbriers. Greenbriers, very famous along the creeks and rivers in eastern Oklahoma, and they are notorious, very hard and clingy to walk through. They're hard to ride through. And one of the reasons that this site was chosen is it was very inaccessible, where Belle and first initially her father-in-law, Tom Starr, a lot of people kind of wanted to get a hold of her father-in-law. This place had a box canyon protected by a bunch of greenbriers, and it just wasn't a lot of ways in and out. And I've tried to ride through greenbriers on a horse, and even on a horse with shaps, it's really, really hard on the horse and hard on you. So, yeah, you're welcome to those greenbriers. And somebody else, saw met our state insect, the chigger, on a trip up there recently. Yeah, there he is. That's our state insect. I'll show you. There's some bigger bugs out there as we go along. So I understand you're going to have a lunch in the Belle Starr room, and no knock on the Wyndham, but there's 2 hours. So that's the waiting room here. So Belle Starr's final resting place is the name of the topic here, and we're going to refer to it entirely as Younger's Bend because that's what Belle called it, okay? And there's some questions about why she named it Younger's Bend, or was it named Younger's Bend before she got there? But there's no doubt that it's about a famous bunch of guys named Younger, and most of you know that history. So my own personal history starts in Arkansas, and then about 30 miles from here, just a little bit north of Salisaw. My family came in there, so in the very early part of before statehood. I will be the 5th generation buried in Oklahoma dirt. Chokes me up a little bit. That is Sequoia's cabin, owned by Sequoia. And it's over here. It's now reverted from the National Park Service to the Cherokee Nation. My grandmother was born on that hearthstone the last day of 1906. Close to midnight. The hearthstone's still there. My great-grandmother's amniotic fluid is soaked into that stone. Okay? The rock around the enclosure built in the WPA days was built by my grandmother's brother-in-law and his brother. They were hired by the WAPA to build a rock enclosure. So that is a personal part of my family history. So I am only 2 generations removed from a log cabin in the Cookson Hills. So another part of Aikens, and of course we all know about Charles Arthur Floyd, and that's his grave with the red flowers there. But Michael, when you're taking that picture, you're standing on my great-great-grandfather. Just saying, my great-grandfather Robert Hood is laying right there, and so somebody backs up and takes a picture, you're probably standing on my folks. So, and the bottom, I am from Ada. My grandfather moved to Ada, both my mother's father and my father's father. So they were Masons. And so, not a real clear history, but we know locally what happened. Because if you mess with a Mason back in those days, in 1909, A. Gus Bobbitt, a very prominent Mason, was shot and killed in a dispute over some cattle. And 3 of my great-grandfathers were there. In fact, one of my great-grandfathers was related to West. He's the one on the left. He was a second cousin, and it didn't matter. He was coming too. Every Mason in the area was at that hanging. So, little background that's not really highly publicized, but one of those things. It's still a part of a great history. So my family has been embroiled or affected by a lot of the history of Oklahoma. And so this is Younger's Bend, and if you look at the top, you see the state of Oklahoma. You obviously know it's in Oklahoma. Some of you have been there. So Younger's Bend was a bend in the Canadian River, and the prominence of the Canadian River was that it was surveyed from Fort Gibson as one of the boundaries that served between the Cherokee, the Choctaw, and Creek nations. So and it happened to run in an east-westerly fashion that made it amenable, and so it served as a boundary, and it was surveyed. And from the early days, and if you look at the county lines, if you look at the Creek and Cherokee and Choctaw, that line is still etched in the maps. However, in 1964, they did away with the bend, at least a large part of it, because they dammed the river right there between 2 large mountains, High Early and Sandy Mountain. It's a very narrow dam, but it holds back one of the largest bodies of water in the southern United States. It's shallow, but very large geographically. And so they cut it straight through there and cut right through the middle of the bend. The bend was named for Cole Younger, a little bit debatable. Maybe it was Bruce Younger, maybe it was Cole Younger. Various debates. Cole was a member of the Quantrill's Raiders, obviously, and they wintered there. And so there was rumors that he scouted it, and some of the books talk about that. The real fact is it was under the control of Tom Starr, who was a scout for Stan Wadey and the Confederate forces. So I think it was pretty much already occupied in the old settlers who sided with the Confederates, so he knew where it was at. They wintered there from 1862 to 1864, and something of a little note that's not mentioned a lot is that Jesse James, one of the Quantrill's Raiders there, took a pistol shot in his right chest from a trooper at Fort Gibson in a skirmish, and that pistol was a .32 caliber, and that bullet is still up in his burial site. When they exhumed his body, there it was, and that originated at Fort Gibson. He was also shot through there with a rifle, if you remember, and had a really tremendous, horrible recovery from that. But he was actually wounded in that. It's in the Chronicles of Oklahoma, and some of the Quantrill Raider books mention it. So after the war, of course, we don't have to go into the James Younger gang. You know about all that. The raid on Northfield, Minnesota. Belle comes to this area in 1880, and about the same time, and this is noted in some books too, that there was a major rift about how the Younger brothers were being taken care of, that they had avoided the hangman's noose. So there, about 3 years or so after they were tried and convicted and in prison, there was still a big motion to take them out and hang them. A lot of sentiment there. And so about the same time that Belle settled here in 1880, that was going on in the national news. And of course, she had grown up with these guys. These families, the Shirley family, the James family, The Reed family, her first husband, the Younger family, were all from western Missouri. And you can hear it referred to as Boone's Lick or the Confederate Little Dixie, whatever, a bunch of names. But those were Southern sympathizers along the edge with Kansas. And that is where all these guys came from. They stayed home to protect their territory. They all had a lot of holdings. And they came to Younger's Bend because William Clark Quantrill happened to be very good friends with Chief Mays, one of the old settlers who was, at the time, the chief of the Cherokee Nation. Okay? So, let's see. Belle had a little quote there. This was put up in 2010. Bob Blackburn actually put my name on it. I think it's one of the few state markers that actually has, and very proud of that. He honored us with that. So this is actually the map of the Cherokee Nation. And I'll show you. This is a modern map, and just recently, the Cherokee Nation is now on Google Maps, believe it or not. It took quite a while. So Fort Smith is right over here. This body of water is Lake Eufaula, and that is the Bend right there. That is a distance of about 70 miles. And that is, by horseback, a 2-day ride. There's another thing you can kind of note is that Highway 9 down here, which runs from Fort Smith over to Norman, Oklahoma, pretty much covers the old Bard Road. And that is a road that was on its way to being the route to Albuquerque and Santa Fe. However, and I said Bard, it's Beale, the Beale Road. And they ran into the Comanches out in western Oklahoma, moved it north, but for a little bit of a problem, those great arches would have been in Fort Smith here instead of St. Louis. Okay? And the other prominent road is the road that was initially known as the Cherokee Trail, the Shawnee Trail, and it had the East Branch, but it ran from about Preston, Texas up to Baxter Springs, Kansas. And in the cattle drives after the Civil War, they started in the eastern part of the state and progressed across Oklahoma to the western part as they moved the railheads west. And so that road, the Texas Road, basically was a major north-south thoroughfare, and so was Highway 9, the Beale Road. Those were the east and west. So essentially, this area around Eufaula, Oklahoma, was the I-35 and I-40 of its day. Okay? I've seen in several books about the seclusion. It was out in the middle of nowhere. And that was right, pretty close to the two busiest roads in the region, with a lot of travel. And it was just secluded in its local orientation in terms of the roads. It's very close, but it was just very hard to get to, and it was very protected. So here is a map from the Perry Castena University of Texas collection. And this is in 1890, and you can see the Bend actually is pretty prominent. Now, Google Earth, you can see the Bend still sits right here, right up against this, and this is a ridge. And you can see exactly where the Bend was, and you can see how it's been cut across by the Corps of Engineers. So, there is a little tiny piece of property right over here, and that is where the Bend, and it's right in here. That's where the home was that Belle inherited in 1880. It wasn't built by Belle. It was built by a native a Cherokee named Harrell, and then went to a guy named Big Head, and then went to the Starr family. So interesting part at the time that the property of the Cherokee Nation was entirely owned by the tribe. Nobody had personal ownership until the Dawes Commission later. And then they were given allotments to break it up. But at this time, you could have ownership of the barn, the cabin, but you could not have ownership of the property. The property itself was owned by the Cherokee Nation as a whole. This corner of the Cherokee Nation is the far southwest corner adjacent to the Creek Nation and the Choctaw Nation here. Very significant part of that in the fight that developed between the old settlers and the Ross Party, this was the headquarters for all the old settlers. So the Boudinos, the Wadys, the Starr family, all those people were right here. Captain Dutch, This is listed as Duchess Creek, like a Duke and Duchess. Well, we don't have many of those in Oklahoma, to be perfectly honest. It was Dutch '(S) Creek in the old days. And Dutch was, his name was Ta Chi. He was the last war chief of the Cherokee Nation. So Dutchess Creek became Duchess Creek. And there's a marina there, and it still persists as Duchess on the maps. This is the bend. This is looking from the dam and an overlook on Lake Eufaula is right behind me. And this is looking, here's the bend. This is that sand that is just so deep you can't believe. Vegetation hardly clings to it, and the state allows the four-wheelers and ATVs to get in there, and they churn it up. It is just deep alluvial sand from the river. This is all deep, wet sand. A lot of ways to end your life trying to walk through there, because there is quicksand all along here. It's just deep, deep sand. Now, right down here on the other side of the bend, there is a shale path that crosses from north to south, and that is the side of the ambush for Belle Starr. Okay, the Hoyt Lane, you can't see it through the vegetation anymore. The fields have all plowed, but you can find the narrow band of shale that allows a wagon to pass, and that's where Hoyt Lane was at, and that's where she was on her way home. Cabin's right in there. And this is Younger's Bend as it exists today. And the question is why? I can't tell you. My dad was an avid fisherman. I grew up fishing on Number 9 Landing. If you're from Oklahoma, it's right there on Lake Eufaula, not very far from this location. The best striper fishing in the state of Oklahoma is right behind the dam on that very picture I showed you. My father's favorite place in the world. Belle Starr was just over the hill, and we didn't even know it. He would have freaked out if he had been able to see that. My father passed in 2009. In 2010, I was looking for property and something to do, and the unique thing was that things just kind of came together. I found this cabin on the internet, built in 1850, entirely of hardwoods, in California, Missouri. Same thing, western Missouri. It's a big cabin by comparison. They took it down stick by stick and delivered it down here, and we put it back up. There was a trail. I've taken all the markers down. If you've been there recently, some of you said you had. Everything except the cedar rotted away quickly. So we're in the process of rebuilding that. And then again, her grave has been restored, and I'll show you that. So Younger's Bend as it existed in 1889. This is a photo taken in 1899, 10 years after Belle Starr's death, because she was still noteworthy 10 years after she died. When Belle Starr died in 1889, her obituary ran in the Chicago Tribune and the San Francisco Examiner, as well as papers all across the United States. She was an international celebrity because of the notoriety from the press. Unfortunately, it makes it very hard for people like Michael Wallace to sort through, because there's a lot of yellow journalism there. And this is her original gravestone, which I just have a remnant of. It's made out of soft limestone, and it was made here in Arkansas. It just wasn't made to last, but it was easy to carve, and so there's a lot of tombstones made by the same people throughout eastern Oklahoma and western Arkansas. Okay, so here's some of the things that were happening at the time that made the environment there so unique. In 1824, they established Fort Gibson, which is just west of Fort Smith. So the hell on the border, well, this was the hell over there. This was a very hard place to get to. There was a lot of infighting. It was actually Osage territory. They didn't like it, the Cherokees being there. But in 1830, the Indian Removal Act was completed, passed through Congress, and the mobilization began of natives from the southeast part of the United States, and their tribal lands were confiscated. And everybody's heard about the Trail of Tears, and you see the horrible picture. The fact was that in 1830, there were a lot of sellouts. Okay? They took the money, they left, they settled in the most prime portion of the Cherokee Nation within the boundaries, and that was the area I just showed you, down around the southwest corner. And that was a very fertile farmland. That's the reason they settled there. But the people who didn't accept the treaty were very angry at those who had accepted it, so they got moved with nothing, no money, no reimbursement. and forcibly removed with a lot of death and tragedy on the trail. So obviously that sets up an environment of a lot of confrontation between the two parties. The Shawnee Trail in about 1840 actually becomes known as the Texas Road because it actually is no longer a trail. It's not a series of wandering trails up to Baxter Springs. It actually becomes a really noteworthy trail that's been engineered and surveyed, and it runs from Preston, Texas up to Baxter Springs. Okay? And again, the Texas Road eventually would be the route for the MKT Railroad, Missouri, Kansas, Texas Railroad. You notice they left Oklahoma out of that. But that path went exactly next to the road, and that road was on the boundary between the Creek and Cherokee Nations. So the Texas Road was a really important north-south egress. In 1849, this is an interesting thing. It's kind of personal to me because you see S.W. Woodhouse, Dr. Woodhouse, was the naturalist on the party. He was a physician trained in Philadelphia, and it was very fashionable at the time to go out west, even up into Teddy Roosevelt's age. Wealthy people from the east, from wealthy families, would go out west and prove themselves. So this survey party took off from Fort Gibson in 1849 and went all the way around the Creek Nation, which includes Tulsa. And Dr. Woodhouse was the nature officer on that, and he kept a very explicit diary. It's called A Naturalist in the Indian Territory, and I think it's by University of Nebraska Press. It's a day-by-day account, including the fact that he shot his own horse in the head, trying to collect a bird. Some of his specimens are still in the Smithsonian. Now, in 1849, you know what happens? Gold rush, right? We're trying to figure out a very quick way to get to California besides going south. So basically, Captain Marcy was given orders from Fort Smith to survey west and began to try and create a trail. And then Edward Beale, who was an entrepreneur, very wealthy man, across from the White House is the Beale House, which is still used for diplomatic occasions and things. It was his. So Edward Beale starts in Fort Smith and begins to construct a road to the west. He's going to go through Comancheria, irrespective that they're the best light horse cavalry in the world by many opinions. He's headed that way. And he gets to 1860 and he's only stopped by the Civil War. The first iron bridge, metal bridge, west of the Mississippi was installed just a few miles from here, crossing Samboy, and that would, if you're a Francophile, that would be Sans Bois, but we call it Samboy Creek. It's deep, and you had to cross it, so they brought a bridge and crossed it with an iron bridge. And the little town is still on the map of Iron Bridge. It's on Highway 9. Iron Bridge was blown up by Stand Watie and the Confederate forces because they raided Fort Gibson, retreated, and they got the wise idea to blow up the Iron Bridge. So it sits in the bottom of the creek. So anyway, that's the pertinent part. This, up until the point it gets west of here, over past Eufaula, was a major route from Fort Smith. And so everybody going west would come through that area, the very area that we sit. This is from the 1891 National Archives map, and this actually shows the nations. Let me see if I can see where the bend is. So the Cherokee Nation comes down and makes a bend right down in here. This is creek. It's right there. That bend is Younger's Bend. So it was there even way back then, and it became ingrained as a part of the boundary that was established, and so it's perpetuated. So Younger's Bend is still visible on maps, county maps, Indian Nation maps, and a bunch of other things, even though it no longer technically exists. Okay, well, you all know about Belle. This is one of her, we know this is Belle. This is by a photographer here in Fort Smith. It took her 2 days to ride from Younger's Bend to here. It's about 72 miles along that path. She would stay at Samboy Creek on the west bank. She had a family there that she was friends with, so they would, on their way to Fort Smith, stop there and then stop on the way back and then ride into Younger's Bend from there. So Younger's Bend, distant, but by the same token, it had major access to Fort Smith. Okay? So here's what I was alluding to about the things that were going on. In 1839, the Treaty Party, which is also called the Old Settlers or the Stanwatie Party, were fighting the Home Guard, which were also known as the Ross Party or the Penn Indians. And so the Cherokee Nation was at war well before the Civil War. And of course, the two parties each sided with one or the other. The Treaty Party, the Stanwatie, became an official Confederate general, last one to surrender, by the way. The Home Guard sided with the Union, and so the national Civil War becomes expanded in the Indian nations. Okay, same thing going on up around western Missouri, because Kansas is allowed to come in as a secessionist state, which tips the balance. Not a secessionist, a anti-slavery, abolitionist state. So that tips the balance. So then you have all these fervent abolitionists who flooded into Kansas, and they're right adjacent to the Little Dixie part of Missouri. So the Missouri border wars actually start well before the Civil War. And that's where you get Jayhawkers. Jayhawkers, the Union won. So the Jayhawkers are now a basketball team. And the Bushwhackers and the other notable names and Quantrill are all known as sort of less desirable because they lost. So that's the way it works. So again, here's where Quantrill's raiders wintered within the Cherokee Nation because of William Quantrill's relationship with Chief Mays. Okay, Tom Starr took over. Tom Starr was very associated with the Confederate forces. He was an official scout. He was huge. He was 6'5" or so, huge man, could run like a horse. His family was killed in some of the raids back up here, and his father and a younger retarded brother who was still at home were killed. And he collected the ears of 13 men who had been involved in the raiding party on his home, and he wore them as a necklace. One bad hombre, okay? His son, Sam, marries Belle in 1880. So now this is Belle's probably third husband, but Sam Starr's a native. He's a Cherokee, he's on the roll, and she can live in the territory, in the Indian Nation, as long as she is married to a native Cherokee who's on the rolls. Regular whites couldn't live here. There was no provision after the Civil War for the whites to be in the Indian Nations. There was no legal means of enforcing anything. It's the reason it was outlawed territory, because in giving the Cherokees and the 5 civilized tribes their light horse police law, they were never able to enforce against a white man. Okay, that's just the way it was back then. So there was no legal way of getting rid of those until the Western District Court of Arkansas has established jurisdiction, which required an act of Congress. So the court that was here had jurisdiction out over the Indian nations in terms of whites, non-Indians, but also in terms of Indians. So there were several that were tried here. In 1880, Belle Starr moves there with Sam, and that's her home where she hopes she'd be peaceful, away from everyone. But she had a life of turmoil. As Michael can tell us, it wasn't peaceful for long. She lived there 9 years before she was shot. She was born in Carthage, Missouri, died in 1899. This was the original stone, which only just this remnant down here remains. That's her horse Venus, the Star, and the Bell. Okay. So Star was a prominent sign for the Cherokee Nation. It actually had 7 legs instead of 5, but who's counting? And then the sentiment, which this was carved and paid for by her daughter, who was actually a madam here in Fort Smith. And you can still see, I think, the brothels over here somewhere. So, again, Belle was very noteworthy. So here's where one of the most historically relevant things that happened at Younger's Bend was that this man, Frederick Bard, who was a writer, came here 10 years after the fact from Belle's assassination and rewrote the history from 10 years and put it into numerous magazines. He put it in print a lot of different places. The photographs, his collection is at the University of Oklahoma. Some you'll see do not have the stamp because he also parlayed those photographs all over. Stern magazine was one that was very prominent. They displayed quite a few of his pictures. And this was Belle's gravesite. Now, 1 year after she was buried, she was dug up. And unfortunately, they advertised that she was buried with her 2 babies, one in each hand. Her babies were pistols, and somebody dug them up and stole the pistols. And so, her pistols. She had, she's pictured frequently with a Schofield revolver, which is a big cavalry horse pistol. That picture back in Fort Smith shows that. It's a huge pistol. It was a cavalry pistol. It was a top load, so it broke open. It could reload on the right. It was a famous pistol. Schofield was the head of the Union forces in Missouri. Those Union forces were responsible for killing her brother, Bud. He was killed by Union forces in Missouri. Schofield pistol became the favorite of the James Younger gang and all the Quantrill's raiders. The surviving pistol of Jesse James is in National Archive, and it is a Schofield pistol. So the one pistol we can directly attribute to Jesse James is a Schofield. Cole Younger carried a Schofield. And if Belle, if you look at that picture again, you will see that she's got ivory-handled Schofield. So somebody had given that to her as a gift. Whether it was Bruce or Cole, I don't know. Somebody gave it to her. Maybe it was one of the other younger, or maybe it belonged to her husband at the time, Jim Reed, who also rode with that crowd. But Frederick Bard captured all that. And he captured these photographs. And if you look at the grave, you can see here's the edge of the cabin. This is a large barn that Belle and Sam actually constructed on the site. And you can see there's a living quarters upstairs. There is a stairway right here. And then the small cabin, which was original to the property, built in about 1830, is still there in 1889. It's still habitable. I'll show you the picture. So here's a direct side view. You can see the prominent tombstone, this kind of arched roof. And here's the cabin again. Here's the 3 posts of the cabin. And right off to the left here, it's hard to see, but there's a corn crib. So interestingly now, there are 5 courses of rock. We're down to here. There are 4 visible at the grave now. That 5th course has already sunk into the ground. Here's another picture of the cabin. Rock fireplace. And I don't want to pick on anybody, but one of the books notably made note of this perched on a rocky ledge. There's not a rock on this place. When we dug the cabin, we dug 15 feet of solid sand. All the rocks were brought down from the top of the hill on High Early. And they built, and they still do, use this stone for building. There is actually a stone quarry up there. So here's the cedar logs. This was an add-on the back. They're obviously hauling their water, which the well is over here. Here's the barn. Here's the corner of the corn crib. There's the corn crib. Now here's the corner of the house over here. And so open slats for air, hogs, prominent part of the Cherokee culture, raising corn or maize, and from their deep south heritage. And so this is a corn crib. Open for ventilation, you just pile the corn in. And I'm sure that's a magnet for every kind of rodent in the area. Here's the well, and if you read some of the accounts, they'll talk about a babbling brook. There was no babbling brook. It was a well. There's a 26-inch by 26-foot deep well there that's hand-laid with rock, no mortar. And somebody asked earlier, hey, did anybody ever go down and look at the bottom of the well? Yeah. I'm going to show you a picture of a man in a minute. He put his stepson down there on a rope. And I talked to that man. He wanted to see that well, and he said, I didn't look. He said, I wanted out of there. So I yelled and said, there's nothing down here. Pull me back up. But the well's still there. Luckily, it's not big enough for most people to drop in, but it's pretty much something. Here's the front of the house. Now, this is from a later collection. And this is actually the front or north side of the property. Here's the stairway going up to a living quarters above the barn, animals downstairs, people upstairs, and of course here's the horses over here parked in the driveway. And if you look, I had this looked at by a couple of agronomists, and that is maize. That's the crop, maize, which is, of course, raised for animal feed, not exactly corn like we know. Okay? Now in the 20s, the cabin has suffered some fate. This is again from the Oklahoma Historical Society, but they lost the chimney and they created a window. They've lost a post over here and they put a little prop up there. The cabin is really going through deterioration, but again, this is now almost 100 years old at this point. So here's the comparison from 1899 to the 1920s. You see that the cabin has gone through a lot of deterioration, but even here, it's still habitated. There's still people living there, okay? Now, an interesting fellow comes into the play. Several people actually owned the Younger Bend area after the allotments from the Dawes Commission. This guy, an interesting man, is a barber in Colorado. And if you look back in here, you'll see an adobe building. In his barber shop, which he rented, he found a map to this property, and he dug up and got enough money to buy this brand new 1932 Buick. He figured that was a lot easier way of making a living than trying to cut hair. So he took the rest of the money and he found that Belle Starr's property, Younger's Bend, was on a sheriff's sale for $125, and he bought it. And he spent the rest of his life digging holes around Younger's Bend looking for the buried loot. Okay? His name was Claude Hamilton. I bought the property from his daughter. This is what it looked like when I got it. Claude had already become a very elderly man and had passed on. It had fallen to his daughter. And this are those famous briars that we were talking about. That is an absolute mess. You can't walk through it. You can't ride through it. It's a disaster. And so that all had to be cleared by hand because I wasn't sure what was underneath it. Well, I'll tell you what was underneath it. As we call them locally, a coontail rattler, which you would know is a western diamondback, and that's my leg. So it's not just chiggers up there, friends. There's also some other animals. Luckily, it was a dry bite, which 50% of all big snake bites are dry, and that's a big snake. Okay, now I think this is from Hick's book, and I'm sorry I don't actually have the reference, but this is a picture of the gate that led to Belle Starr. So when the cabin fell down, they took some of the remaining timbers. The only thing that remained of the original cabin at Younger's Bend was an iron gate. Now, those of you from Oklahoma know that nothing really lasts out in the wild. You can't get iron to stay. It'll rust away quickly. But this had been there since the early days, and Mr. Hamilton had it welded together as an entrance to the property, and then he wanted to charge you a nickel to come up and look at it. When I got the property, it's out there in the brush. So I realized, hey, that's the same gate that used to be up there. And we salvaged the gate and put it back in the cabin as a bedstead. Here's what the gravesite looked like. And just as you described, it had this wire around it with barbed wire up at the top, and somebody had taken and cut a hole in it. The gravestone, which is now a facsimile that Claude Hamilton had made because the other had deteriorated, there's been a complete collapse here. Here's a triangular piece that goes under there. There's a triangular piece there. I pushed these together because at the time, really, there was a cedar tree growing out of the middle of it. So I promptly made that into a hiking staff. I got to figure there's a little bit of bell in that hiking staff. But I pushed the two together to see if the edges match and trying to figure out how it was going. Here is the last time that the original headstone remnant was in the socket that was prepared for it. And I brought it back down there and took the photo. Here's the facsimile headstone, and you can see how much of it is gone. You only can see the bottom part here because this was of a soft material and people chipped it for souvenirs. And I told you that my great-great-grandfather's grave's right across from Charlie Floyd, and in my lifetime I can't count the number of headstones that have been chipped off on the Floyd. Pretty Boy Floyd's tombstone is always chipped, as long as I can remember, been chipped away for souvenir hunters. So when I bought the property, I got these artifacts, and I was going to bring them down here. I told Michael I was going to kind of load them up, but honestly, this is very soft, almost chalky at this stage. And this saddle, which was procured by Mr. Claude Hamilton back in the 30s from the Starr family, he kept it under his bed. And it is so dry and so brittle, I just couldn't handle it to get it down here. It's nice to kind of walk up and touch it, but it's so brittle that, and I've haven't really taken care of it while it's been at the museum. It's in the Three Rivers Museum in Muskogee, and I noticed it was just very, very dry and brittle, and I just didn't want to break it up. No maker's mark. We don't know where it's from. The rifle that won the West, right there. Okay, this was found in a cave right behind the cabin. So again, the cabin sits in the mouth of a large blind canyon. That's a protected area. You can't get over the top because the walls are too steep. This was found there by Mr. Hamilton, and had the family authenticate it. I don't know how they did that, but that was his story. You can see the receiver, and you also see there's some marks on it. So we can all suppose what that means. Okay, so when I found the property, I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have an authentic cabin? Same time, I found this cabin being torn down in California, Missouri. They tore the asbestos siding off of it, and there's the original cabin underneath with the original hardwood logs. So here's all the old siding torn off. You can see it's two entrances because this is called a saddlebag cabin. There is a wall in between with a fireplace. This was the original cabin, just this part, and they built this and the top over it. Frequently in the South, they would put a split in between called a dog trot, and that's a very common cabin through the Deep South for air. There's the original cabin. So who else would I get as an architect but Gene Starr, direct descendant of the same Starr family. Very prominent architect in Tulsa. Took care of his family. This is his son, Jason. I guess said, here's the cabin I've got, here's the dimensions. I want it to look like this one. And Gene did a great job. And it has indoor plumbing, so I'm proud of that. So here, those sticks are moved down. It took a special crew to put this together. There is not one nail holding up that structure. It's pegged with wood sterrets, which are large pegs. So there's nothing holding it together. And then we put the roof on it and put the living quarters on the back, and then we're going to put the fireplace on this side. So we had to cut where there was a window, we had to cut it into the fireplace. The chainsaws threw sparks like you're cutting metal. It was the most amazing thing. And when you hit those timbers, driving those sterrets in, they ring like you're hitting steel. Then there it is all put together. Okay? I have a little video that this has been featured in 2 issues of True West, several issues of Oklahoma Today, a bunch of different magazines. There's a video on Facebook showing this cabin as we've kind of put it together. We had a lot of tours and a lot of people involved. There is, as it sits now, it's aged a little bit. Everything's a little bit more brown. Inside, there's a fireplace over here, and so you can see this is why the neighbors never broke in, because there's nothing in there. There's nothing to carry off. There's no TVs. There's no electronics. Oh, there's the bed. So here's that headboard. These are wagon springs that are brazed on, as you can see, used as a hinge for the gate. So this is the original bed frame that was in this cabin, the original cabin. Okay, now it's in the new cabin. It's a little spooky, to be honest with you. That's a whole different story. Okay, so we got some, tried to get period appropriate stuff to decorate the cabin. This was the way we had it initially. I had these signs in both Cherokee and English, and we had a red cedar sign said Younger's Bend. We labeled the trees. So there's sassafras in both English and Cherokee. And there's a grave, and we had a little paper in here that was a photograph of the original, and you could see in the same orientation. The squirrels loved it. They ate everything. So this is 2011, and I did this comparison because we were getting close to the 125th anniversary of Belle's death. So here's the original photograph from 1899. Here's the current. And you can see the places where the mortar shows through, where there were deficits and pieces of stone missing. Here's the side view. You see the corners were broken off here and there. We made up for it with mortar. And you can also see that the 5th rung has completely disappeared into the soil because of the weight. Okay, so here it is today as we look. We try and keep it mowed. the facsimile headstone in place, and lots of visitors. We found everything up there. We never remove anything, but I found all kinds of bullets, all calibers. Marijuana cigarettes, those vape things. I don't know. There's always interesting things laying on the grave. And I never remove them, so I don't know where they go. Okay? Here's Younger's Bend in the winter. This is actually looking over the river. This is the river right down here. That is a mountain across that is, so there was a cave there called Belle Starr's Cave. They blew it up because the roof began to fall in. And so a bunch of local guys got together and blew it up a long time ago, back in the 50s, to keep kids from playing in there because large segments of that flat. So the most interesting thing about Younger's Bend is the number of people that I got to meet. And I've met several of you before, but I also got to know Peter Matheson. So that's odd for a Western writer. Peter wasn't a Western writer. Peter was a hippie from the 60s, and he wrote all sorts of things about snow leopards and the way the Indian tribes have been treated. Very well known, very accomplished, lots of award-winning books. So I get a call in about 2011, 2012 from a man said, "Hey, would you call this guy?" And he said, "This is Peter Matheson's his home phone number. He doesn't have a cell. Will you call him?" And I went, "Well, of course I will. I read his books. I know, At Play in the Field of the Lord, all those things that he had written. I had read numerous of his books, still have them, as a matter of fact." And I thought, this is kind of odd. What I didn't know is that he was very well known for what happened? He's very well known for his. We might have timed out. I'm not sure. Very well known for his trilogy, Killing Mr. Watson, Lost Man's River, Bone of Bones, and those were about Edgar Watson, the man who was thought to be the person who killed Belle Starr. He was the man who was indicted. Again, this is one of those can of worms that you open up and it's a mess because there's all sorts of theories and every book has got a different conclusion. But he was the man who was indicted for the murder. And so I talked to Peter about this at length. Come to find out, Peter had a home phone but no cell phone. Peter typed on a Smith Corona non-electric typewriter. He had fished in the Thousand Islands around Naples for many, many years. He grew up fishing there. He knew all about that. And Edgar Watson had a cabin there, a home, as a matter of fact, and a large operation. Edgar Watson owned the land that is now Marco Island, Sanibel Island, and all around Naples. That was his sugar plantation, one of the largest in the United States. He had schooners which traveled up the west coast, up the east coast, all the way to Boston carrying cane sugar. It was a tremendous operation. So if somebody always asks me, "Hey, where'd that money go that Belle hid there?" Well, I think somebody took it. And they bought a bunch of property in Florida and started a sugar cane. The real fact is, that was also Peter Matheson's idea as well. Peter was of the opinion that he was an absolute maniac. He interviewed his family. He said, "This guy's crazy. He's a mass murderer. He killed 29 people. A hurricane washes through. All the bodies are exposed because he buried them on the beach. It was very easy to dig." He comes up to a small store in Chokoloskee, Florida, called Smallwood Store, and he was assassinated. All the men in the community shot him before he got out of the boat. He was very feared. Rumor was that he bragged about having killed Belle Starr while he was there. And so a noteworthy man who was pretty much not convicted, but a mass murderer, and a man that when he was drinking was about as mean as anybody around. Okay? So apologize, there's some other pictures we couldn't get to, some noteworthy people. One shout out was to Linda West Sanchez, who was the editor of the Muskogee Phoenix, the Eufaula Times, Indian Times, and she was the granddaughter of Franklin West, who's the man who shot Sam Starr in a fight at a Christmas party. Because Sam Starr was riding Belle's horse Venus, and Franklin West one of his own cousins, but a light horseman, shot and killed Venus in the bottom down there. So it started a fight. Both men killed each other, as was truly the way in a bunch of gunfighters. In a gunfight up close, most everybody died. One kid was shot in the face. But anyway, Karen had the pistol that had never been cleaned, and one of the photos was of her holding that pistol, and she let me hold it and examine it. There were still 4 shells in the chamber. The 5th had been removed because I'm not sure. That was the one that had been fired. And then Oscar Ray helped me on a video. If you go to Facebook, you can see it. Oscar's grandfather was one of the black marshals that are here. I guess Art Burton's not here already. But everybody knows about Bass Reeves. But Oscar Ray, who lives in Muskogee, his grandfather was also a black marshal from the Western District Court of the Arkansas. Roger Bell's written a lot of books about history of Muskogee. He's been instrumental in helping us. Let's see who else was of those pictures. Actually had some pictures of some of the people from foreign lands. So 2 producers from London, England, a person from Toronto, and the joke was I had Charles Rainey up there because he came all the way from Fort Smith, next to all those people who traveled distances.